You gave that job everything, not just the hours, not just the commute. You gave it your attention when you should have been resting, your energy when you were already empty, your loyalty when no one was watching and no one would have blamed you for coasting. You showed up early, you stayed late, you covered shifts, you carried weight that wasn't yours to carry. And somewhere along the way, that job stopped being just a job. It became a piece of who you were. The paycheck became proof you were valuable. The title became proof you were somebody. The routine became the rhythm of your dignity, and then it was gone. Maybe they called you into a room. Maybe it was an email. Maybe it was a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon that you didn't see coming. Maybe you saw it coming for months, and that almost made it worse because you were watching it drift toward you like a wave you couldn't outrun. And in the moment it landed, when the words were spoken and the door was closed and you walked out into a parking lot that suddenly felt like foreign territory, something inside you didn't just break. Something inside you went quiet. Because here's the thing about losing your job that nobody talks about. It's not just the income, it's not just the uncertainty, it's the question that starts whispering before you even get to your car. Who are you now, without the title, without the paycheck, without the calendar that told you where to be and when, without the meetings that made you feel needed, without the problems you solved and the people who depended on you? Who are you when all of that is stripped away? And that question, if you let it, will eat you alive. Because if your entire identity was built on what you produced, then when production stops, identity collapses. If your worth was measured by your output, then when output ends, worth disappears. And you know the voice. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It says things you would never say to another human being, but you say them to yourself without hesitation. You're done, you're finished. You have nothing to show for all those years. Nobody's going to hire someone your age. The market's moved on. Your skills are obsolete. You let your family down. You should have seen this coming. You should have prepared better. You should have been better. You're not enough. You never were. And the cruelest thing that voice says, the one that cuts deepest, is the simplest. You are worthless. Now let me tell you something, and I need you to hear this not as a sermon, not as a platitude, not as a Bible verse someone throws at you like a bandage on a wound that needs surgery. I need you to hear this as someone who has walked through that parking lot. Someone who has sat in that car with the keys in the ignition and no idea where to drive, because home doesn't feel like home anymore and you don't have anywhere else to go. Your worth was never in that job. It was never in that company. It was never in that title. It was never in that salary. It was never in the approval of a boss who let you go. It was never in the stability that turned out to be an illusion. It was never there. You just felt it so strongly for so long that you forgot where your real value lives. And now that the job is gone, the feeling is gone with it. But the feeling was never the truth. The feeling was always just a shadow cast by something real. And the real thing, your actual worth, didn't move, it didn't shrink, it didn't evaporate. It's still right where it's always been. It's in the hands of the God who made you. Now, before you dismiss that as something you've heard 1,000 times in 1,000 sermons that never paid a single bill, stay with me. I'm not going to tell you to just pray more and trust God and everything will magically work out. You're an adult. You know that bills don't pay themselves. You know that rent is due whether you're feeling spiritual or not. But I am going to tell you something that might change the way you see this entire season. Losing your job is not evidence that God abandoned you. Losing your job is not proof that you're worthless. Losing your job is not a punishment for not being good enough. Losing your job might be the most important thing that ever happened to you. Not because the job was bad, not because you didn't need the money, not because any of this feels good right now, but because sometimes God has to remove something good to make room for something you were actually built for. And the only way He can get you to let go is to have it taken from you. Think about that. If someone had walked up to you 6 months ago and said, leave your job, walk away from that steady paycheck, step into the unknown, you would have said no. Of course you would have. You're responsible. You have bills. You have people counting on you. Walking away from stability is not something wise people do. So God, in His mercy, and yes, I said mercy, even though it feels like cruelty right now, God in His mercy made the decision for you. He closed a door you would never have closed yourself. He ended a chapter you would have kept reading forever because it was comfortable enough, and comfortable enough is the enemy of what you were actually created for. Let me tell you about a man named Joseph. You've heard the story, the coat of many colors, the dreams, the pit his own brothers threw him into. But here's what I want you to notice. Joseph lost his job more than once. He was sold into slavery. Imagine that. One day you're the favorite son. The next day you're property. You have no rights, no freedom, no future. If anyone ever had a reason to feel worthless, it was a 17-year-old kid being sold to strangers by his own family. But Joseph worked. Even as a slave, he worked. Not because he was trying to earn his value back. Not because he thought if he performed well enough, God would finally rescue him. He worked because his identity was never in his position. He knew who he was regardless of what he was called to do. So he served in Potiphar's house, and he rose. He became the manager of everything. He was trusted. He was respected. He built something. And just when it looked like he had found his footing again, just when the ground under him started to feel solid, he lost it all. False accusation, prison, years, not days, not weeks, years of his life, gone. If there was ever a moment to believe the lie that you're worthless, that was it. A slave turned prisoner, a dreamer buried alive, every external measure of worth stripped away again. And yet, in that prison Joseph served, he helped, he interpreted dreams, he used the gifts God had given him even when there was no audience, no title, no paycheck, no recognition. He didn't wait for a platform to be useful. He was useful in the dark. He was faithful when no one was watching. That right there is the difference between someone whose worth is in their work and someone whose worth is in their maker. The person whose worth is in their work falls apart when the work is taken. The person whose worth is in their maker keeps working even when the work seems meaningless, because the work was never the point. The faithfulness was always the point. And here's what happened to Joseph. After 13 years of slavery and prison and waiting and wondering if the dreams he had as a boy were just delusions, God moved, not a day late, not a day early. In one afternoon, Joseph went from the prison to the palace, from forgotten to second in command over all of Egypt. Now here's the part you need to hear. The palace wasn't the reward for good behavior. The palace was the destination that required the pit and the prison to get to. Joseph couldn't have governed Egypt without the skills he developed managing Potiphar's household. He couldn't have advised Pharaoh without the character that was forged in the silence of that jail cell. The very things that felt like setbacks were actually setups. What if that's what's happening to you right now? What if this job loss isn't a detour? What if it's the direct route to where you're actually supposed to go? What if the skills you developed in that role are exactly what you need for the next one, but you needed this space between to realize it? What if the humility that's being forged in you right now, the desperation, the dependence, the stripping away of ego is the very thing the next season requires? Because I'll be honest with you, if you had gone straight from where you were to where you're going, you might have been technically qualified but spiritually unready. You might have had the resume but not the character. You might have had the skills but not the surrender. And God cares more about who you're becoming than about your career trajectory. That's not a platitude. That's the most practical thing you'll hear today. Because if God only cared about your career, He would have protected that job at all costs. The fact that He didn't is not evidence that He abandoned you. It's evidence that He's doing something bigger than your 5-year plan. Let's talk about what happens in the waiting, because right now you're in the waiting. The job is gone. The new thing hasn't appeared yet, and every day that passes feels like another vote for the idea that you're finished. You wake up and for a split second everything is normal. Then you remember, and the weight settles back onto your chest. You check your phone, no calls, no emails, no opportunities, no movement, just silence. And the silence is the hardest part, because at least if God would speak, at least if you could feel His presence or hear His direction or sense some kind of momentum, you could endure. But the silence makes you wonder if He's even paying attention. The silence makes you wonder if the voice that says you're worthless might be telling the truth. Let me tell you what's actually happening in the silence. You know how a seed grows? You put it in the ground, you cover it with dirt, you water it, and then nothing. For days, for weeks, nothing visible, nothing measurable, nothing you can point to and say, see, something is happening. But under the dirt, in the darkness, in the silence, everything is happening. The shell is breaking, the roots are forming, the structure is building, the seed is being transformed into something that can actually hold the weight of the plant it's about to become. And if you dig it up to check on it, if you pull it out of the dirt because you can't stand the waiting, you kill it. Not because it wasn't growing, but because you interrupted the process before the growth could break through to the surface. You're the seed. This season is the dirt. The silence is the growth happening where you can't see it. And I know that sounds poetic. But poetry doesn't pay the mortgage. So let me get practical. While you're waiting, you do the work. Not the work of your old job, the work of becoming. You sharpen your skills, you build your network, you take the course, you read the books, you exercise. You get up at the same time every morning even though you have nowhere to be, because discipline doesn't take a day off and neither does character. You do the work not to prove you're worthy. You do the work because you already are worthy, and worthy people don't sit around waiting to be rescued. They prepare for the rescue before it arrives. Now I want to pause here and go deeper into something, because there's a question underneath the question. You're not just asking, how do I get another job? You're asking something far more fundamental. You're asking, am I still useful? Does my life still matter? Did I miss my chance? Is the best part of my story already behind me? And those questions are so much heavier than unemployment. Those questions go to the core of who you are, and if you don't answer them, no job offer will. Because you can get a new job and still feel empty. You can get a new title and still feel invisible. You can get a bigger paycheck and still feel like you're falling behind. The external fix doesn't heal the internal wound. So let's go there. Let's actually sit in that question. Am I still useful? Here's the answer. Your usefulness was never determined by your employment status. Never. Not when you were employed. Not now that you're not. The clerk at the grocery store who remembers your name and asks how your kid is doing, that person is useful. The father who shows up to the school play even though he's exhausted, that person is useful. The friend who picks up the phone at midnight when someone can't stop crying, that person is useful. The volunteer at the food bank who stocks shelves and never gets thanked, that person is useful. The grandmother who prays for her grandchildren every single morning before the sun comes up, that person is useful. None of that utility is measured in dollars. None of it comes with a title. None of it shows up on a resume. But it matters. It all matters. And you, right now, unemployed or underemployed or between chapters, you still have people who need you. You still have gifts that only you can give. You still have words that only you can speak. You still have a presence that only you can bring into a room. Your usefulness didn't end when your employment did. It just changed form. And maybe, just maybe, this season is about discovering forms of usefulness you never had time to notice when you were too busy working. Let me tell you about Moses. Here's a man who spent 40 years as a prince of Egypt. Educated, powerful, respected. He had the title, he had the palace, he had the future. And then in one impulsive moment he killed a man and lost everything. Overnight, he went from the palace to the wilderness, from a future king to a fugitive shepherd. For 40 years. 40, not 40 days, not 40 weeks. 40 years of tending sheep on the backside of the desert. Think about what that must have felt like. Every day the same. Wake up, lead the sheep, find water, find grass, protect from predators. Repeat. A man who was raised to lead a nation, now leading livestock. A man who was trained in the highest courts of the ancient world, now talking to animals. If anyone had a right to feel like his purpose was over, it was Moses. If anyone had a right to believe the best chapter was behind him, it was Moses. And here's what I love about this story. Moses was 80 years old when God showed up in a burning bush. 80. By every human measure, his life was over. His resume was a joke. 40 years in the desert doesn't exactly impress hiring managers. And yet, That's exactly when God said, "Now you're ready." Not when he was a prince with all the credentials, when he was a broken shepherd with nothing to offer but 40 years of learning how to lead stubborn creatures through a wilderness. God didn't waste those 40 years. He was building Moses into the leader who could handle 40 more years of leading stubborn people through a different wilderness. The desert was the training ground. The sheep were the practice round. The obscurity was the preparation. And if Moses had stayed in the palace, he would have been technically qualified but practically useless. He knew Egyptian leadership. He didn't know desert survival. And God needed a man who knew the desert. What if your wilderness right now is training you for something you can't even conceive of yet? What if the skills you're developing in this season of obscurity, the patience, the humility, the perseverance, the ability to keep going when nothing is happening, what if those are the exact skills your next chapter requires? And what if you couldn't have learned them any other way? Let's talk about the practical fear. Because underneath the spiritual questions, there's the raw, human terror. The bank account is draining, the savings are shrinking, the bills keep coming. And every notification on your phone makes your stomach tighten because what if it's another thing you can't pay? That fear is real. I'm not going to spiritualize it away. Fear of not being able to provide for your family is not a faith failure. It's a human response to a real threat. And yet you haven't missed a meal yet. You haven't been homeless yet. You haven't been abandoned yet. The worst thing you feared might happen hasn't happened, and if it does happen, God will still be there. I know that sounds trite, but it's actually the most solid ground you can stand on. Because if your security was in the job and the job disappeared, then your security was always shaky. If your security is in God and God doesn't disappear, then your security is actually secure for the first time. You're learning a lesson that prosperity could never teach you. You're learning that provision doesn't come from a company. It comes from a God who uses companies as one of his many tools. And when one tool is removed, he has others. He has methods you haven't thought of. He has doors you haven't knocked on. He has provision you haven't imagined. Your imagination is not the limit of God's resources. Your network is not the boundary of God's reach. Your qualifications are not the ceiling on God's plan for your life. There's a story in 1 Kings about a widow. She's at the end of her rope. There's a famine in the land. She's down to her last handful of flour and her last drop of oil. She's gathering sticks to make one final meal for herself and her son. And then she says, "We will die." Not dramatically, just factually. This is it, the end of the road. And Elijah the prophet shows up and asks her for food. Now, if I were that widow, I would have laughed in his face. "Are you serious? I have nothing. I'm about to die, and you want me to feed you first?" But she did it. She made him a small cake from the last of her flour and oil, and then something happened that makes no logical sense. The flour jar didn't run out. The oil jug didn't go dry. Every day there was just enough for that day. Not a warehouse full, not a year's supply. Just enough for today, and then tomorrow. Just enough for tomorrow. Here's what that story is actually about. It's not about getting rich. It's not about abundance. It's about daily provision in the middle of a famine. It's about the fact that when you're at the end of your resources, God's resources are just beginning, and He doesn't always give you the whole picture. He gives you today's portion, because if He gave you the whole picture, you wouldn't need to trust Him tomorrow, and He wants your trust more than He wants your comfort. That's hard to hear, but it's true, and it's actually love, because comfort can coexist with distance from God. You can be comfortable and completely disconnected from the source of your life. But dependence, real dependence, the kind where you wake up every morning and say, "I don't know how this is going to work out, but I'm going to trust you for today," that kind of dependence forces you close. And closeness to God is the whole point. It's not about the flour. It's not about the oil. It's not about the job. It's about the relationship that forms when you have nowhere else to turn. Now let me talk to you about the people around you. Because losing a job doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are people watching. There are people judging. There are people who are going to say things that hurt even when they mean well. Maybe it's your spouse who's scared too, and the fear comes out sideways as frustration. Maybe it's your parents who work their whole lives and can't understand why you can't just find something, anything, like they did. Maybe it's your kids who don't understand why you're home more and why you seem sad. Maybe it's your friends who still have their jobs and don't know what to say, so they say nothing, and the silence feels like abandonment. And then there are the people who do say something. Have you tried praying about it? Maybe God is teaching you something. Everything happens for a reason. Just stay positive. And you want to scream. Because they're not wrong exactly, but they're not sitting in your chair. They're not looking at your bank account. They're not sending out applications and getting silence back. They mean well, but well-meaning words can still land like stones when you're already bleeding. Let me give you permission to forgive those people right now, not for their sake, for yours, because carrying resentment toward people who don't understand your struggle is like drinking poison and expecting them to get sick. It doesn't hurt them, it only hurts you, and you have enough weight to carry right now without adding bitterness to the load. Here's something else nobody tells you about unemployment. You're going to lose some people, not because they're bad people, but because your season makes them uncomfortable. Your struggle reminds them that their own security might be fragile. Your presence is a mirror, and what they see in that mirror is the possibility that everything they're building could collapse too. And some people would rather avoid the mirror than face the reflection. Let them go. Grieve the friendship if you need to, but let them go. The people who stay, the ones who call when they don't know what to say, the ones who sit with you in the silence, the ones who Venmo you money without being asked and never mention it again, the ones who don't treat you like a project or a prayer request, but like a friend who's having a hard time, those people are gold, and this season will reveal who they are. That's actually a gift, a painful gift, but a gift nonetheless. Let's talk about purpose, because that's the word that keeps coming up. You feel like you've lost your purpose, or maybe you're realizing you never really knew what it was in the first place. The job gave you a purpose by default. It gave you tasks and goals and metrics. It gave you a reason to get out of bed, and now that structure is gone and you're face to face with a question you've been avoiding for years. What am I actually supposed to do with my life? And that question is terrifying. But it's also the most important question you could ever ask. Most people never ask it. They drift from job to job, from obligation to obligation, and one day they wake up at 65 and realize they never actually chose their life. The life chose them. They just followed the path of least resistance. You just got knocked off that path, and now you have something most people never get. A forced pause, a moment of clarity, an opportunity to actually decide what comes next instead of just falling into it. So let me ask you some questions, not rhetorical ones, real ones. When have you felt most alive? When have you lost track of time because you were so absorbed in what you were doing? What do people come to you for? What do you know how to do that other people find difficult? What makes you angry? The kind of anger that comes from seeing something wrong and knowing it should be made right. What would you do if money weren't a factor? And before you say nothing, think harder. There's something. There's always something. It might be buried under years of practicality and responsibility and doing what you had to do instead of what you wanted to do. But it's there. And this season, this unwanted, painful, disorienting season, might be the first time in years you've had the space to actually hear it. I want to tell you about David. Before he was king, he was a shepherd, the youngest son, the one nobody thought to invite to the meeting with the prophet. When Samuel came to anoint the next king, Jesse presented 7 sons. 7. And David wasn't even in the room. He was out in the fields doing the job nobody wanted, tending sheep, fighting off lions and bears, alone, invisible, unimportant. And that's where God found him, not in the palace, not in the spotlight, in the obscurity of a job nobody respected. Here's what's crucial. David didn't become king and then learn how to fight. He fought lions and bears as a shepherd, and that trained him to face Goliath as a future king. The boring job, the invisible job, the job where nobody was watching and nobody was cheering, that was the training ground for the throne. And when Goliath showed up, when the entire Israelite army was frozen in fear, David didn't hesitate. Not because he was reckless, because he was prepared. He had already faced death. He had already seen God show up. He had already developed the muscle of faith in the fields where nobody could see. What if your last job, the one you just lost, was your shepherd's field? What if it was never the destination, but the training? What if everything you learned there, everything you endured there, every skill you built and every challenge you navigated was preparation for the Goliath that's waiting for you? And what if losing that job was the only way to get you out of the field and onto the battlefield where you actually belong? Now, let me speak to the part of you that's exhausted. Not just physically tired, though I know you are, but soul tired. Deep down in the bones tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. You've been fighting for so long, you've been believing for so long, you've been holding on for so long, and your grip is slipping. You're not sure how much longer you can do this. You're not sure you even want to, and you feel guilty for being tired. Like a stronger Christian wouldn't feel this way. Like someone with real faith would be more resilient. Let me tell you something. Elijah, one of the greatest prophets who ever lived, the man who called fire down from heaven, the man who outran a chariot, that Elijah ended up under a broom tree in the wilderness asking God to take his life. He was exhausted, he was depressed, he was alone, and God didn't rebuke him, God didn't lecture him, God didn't say, "Where is your faith?" God sent an angel with food and water and said, "Eat, sleep, rest." And then God came close and spoke in a whisper, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, not in the wind, in a whisper. Because exhaustion doesn't need a sermon. Exhaustion needs rest and presence and the quiet assurance that you're not alone. So stop beating yourself up for being tired. You're human. Even the greatest prophets hit the wall, and God met them there. He'll meet you there too. Let's talk about the shame. Because shame is different from guilt. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. Guilt can be addressed. Shame has to be broken. And you've been carrying shame since the moment you lost that job. Shame that you weren't good enough. Shame that you were the one they chose to let go. Shame that you're the one still unemployed while your former colleagues have moved on. Shame that your family has to suffer because of your failure. Shame that you're the husband who can't provide, the wife who can't contribute, the father who can't give his kids what they want, the son who can't make his parents proud. Shame is heavy, and it lies. Every single thing shame says is a lie, but it feels so true because it hooks into your deepest fears. Here's how you break shame. You speak it out loud. Shame thrives in secrecy. Shame grows in the dark. Shame gets stronger every time you hide it. But when you say it, when you tell someone you trust, I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm worthless. I feel like I've let everyone down. The shame loses its power. Because it turns out the person you told didn't run away. They didn't confirm your worst fear. They said, "Me too." Or they said, "That's not true." Or they just sat there and let you cry and didn't try to fix it. And in that moment, shame starts to crack, and light gets in, and healing begins. Not all at once, but it begins. I want to tell you about Peter. This is a man who failed publicly and spectacularly. He was Jesus' right hand, the rock, the one who said, "Even if everyone else falls away, I never will." And then, on the worst night of Jesus' life, Peter denied him 3 times, not to soldiers, not under torture, to a servant girl by a fire. And the rooster crowed, and Peter wept. That's failure. The kind of failure that follows you home, the kind of failure that replays in your mind at 3 in the morning. And Peter could have been done. He could have gone back to fishing and never preached again. He could have believed the lie that his failure disqualified him forever. But here's what Jesus did. After the resurrection, he found Peter. He didn't lecture him. He didn't make him apologize 3 times to match the 3 denials. He asked him one question, "Do you love me?" 3 times. Not to humiliate him, to heal him. Each question was a chance to replace a denial with a declaration. And then Jesus said the words that changed everything. "Feed my sheep." Not "you're fired." Not "you're disqualified." Not "go sit in the corner and think about what you did." Feed my sheep. In other words, your purpose didn't die with your failure. Your calling survived your worst moment. Get back in the game. That same Peter went on to preach at Pentecost, and 3,000 people came to faith in one day. The man who was too afraid to admit he knew Jesus to a servant girl became the man who stood up in front of thousands and proclaimed the gospel. Your failure is not your future. Your worst moment is not your final chapter. The same God who restored Peter is still in the restoration business, and he's not done with you. So where does that leave you? It leaves you here, in this moment, with this choice. You can believe the voice that says you're worthless, or you can believe the voice that says you're loved. You can believe the voice that says it's over, or you can believe the voice that says the best is still coming. You can believe the voice that says you're alone, or you can believe the voice that says I will never leave you nor forsake you. The feelings are going to come. They're going to come every morning when you wake up. They're going to come every time you send an application and hear nothing back. They're going to come every time you see someone else succeeding while you're still waiting. The feelings are going to lie to you, and you're going to have to actively choose to believe the truth over the feelings. That's not denial, that's faith. Faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is the decision to trust God in the presence of doubt. Faith is getting out of bed when you don't feel like there's a reason. Faith is sending one more application when the last 30 got rejected. Faith is believing your worth is intact when every external signal says otherwise. Faith is not a feeling. Faith is a choice. And you get to make that choice again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. You lost a job. You didn't lose your purpose. You didn't lose your identity. You didn't lose your worth. You didn't lose your God. The job was a chapter. It wasn't the whole book. And the author is still writing. He's writing a story right now that you can't see yet. A story that requires this chapter to make sense of the next one. A story that will one day make you look back on this season not as the time you lost everything, but as the time everything changed for the better. Not because it didn't hurt. It hurt. It still hurts. But because the pain was productive. The waiting was working. The silence was growing something underneath the surface. And one day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but one day, you'll see it. You'll see the thread. You'll see the pattern. You'll see that the thing you thought was burying you was actually planting you. That the job you lost was the door that had to close for the one that was meant for you to open. That the identity you built on sand had to collapse so you could build on rock. That the worth you thought came from your work was always, only, ever in the hands of the one who made you. And he's not finished. Not with you, not with your story, not with the purpose he placed inside you before you ever had a job title or a paycheck or a performance review. That purpose is still there. It's been there since before you were born, and it's not going anywhere. You're not a failure, you're not worthless, you're not finished, you're in between, and the between is hard, but the between is also holy, because it's in the between that God does his deepest work. It's in the between that you learn who you really are. It's in the between that your faith becomes your own, not borrowed, not inherited, not performative, yours. So take a breath. You made it through today. That's a victory. You're going to make it through tomorrow, and the day after that. And one of these days, maybe sooner than you think, the phone will ring, or the email will come, or the door will open, and you'll walk through it into the next chapter. And you'll look back at this season with different eyes, not as the season God abandoned you, but as the season he carried you, not as the season your worth was stripped away, but as the season you finally learned where your worth actually lives. It was never in that job. It was always, only, ever in him. And he's got you, right now, right here, in the waiting, in the silence, in the uncertainty, in the fear, in the hope, in the next breath. He's got you, and he's not letting go. Let me take you deeper now, because we've talked about the shame and the fear and the silence. We've talked about Joseph and Moses and David. We've talked about the widow with her last handful of flour. But there's something else happening in this season that you might not have noticed. Something subtle, something quiet, something that might be the most important thing of all. You're being humbled, not humiliated. There's a difference. Humiliation is what the world does to you. It's the layoff. It's the rejection email. It's the awkward conversation at the party where you have to say you're still looking. That's humiliation, and it stings. But humility is what God does in you. It's the softening. It's the surrendering. It's the quiet recognition that you don't control nearly as much as you thought you did. And that's not a weakness. That's actually the beginning of wisdom, because the person who thinks they control their life is living in an illusion. The economy shifts, the company restructures, the industry changes, the body ages. All of it is out of your hands. And until you lose something you thought you controlled, you don't realize how little control you actually had. That's a gift, a terrifying gift, but a gift. Because once you stop trying to control everything, you can actually receive what God is trying to give you. Control is a clenched fist. You can't receive anything with a clenched fist. You have to open your hand, and losing your job just pried your fingers open. Now let's talk about identity, because I think it's the central wound here. You didn't just lose income, you lost the answer to the question, who are you? When someone asked, what do you do, you had an answer, a good answer, a respected answer, an answer that located you in the social order. Engineer, teacher, manager, sales director, nurse, project lead. That answer told people where you fit. It told you where you fit. And now that answer is gone, and you're left with silence when the question comes. I'm in between roles. I'm looking. I'm taking some time. The phrases feel flimsy. They feel like excuses. They feel like you're apologizing for your existence. And here's the trap. If you rush to fill that silence with the next job, the next title, the next quick answer to the question, you might miss what God is trying to teach you in the silence. Because what if He wants you to find an identity that doesn't fit in a job title? What if He wants you to become someone who can answer the question, I'm a child of God, before you answer the question, I'm a software engineer? What if the sequence matters? And what if you had the sequence wrong your whole life? What if you were a Christian who happened to be an engineer instead of an engineer who happened to be a Christian? The difference sounds subtle. It's not. The difference is everything. Because when the engineering is taken away, the first person still has an identity. The second person has nothing. This season is about becoming the first kind of person. Let me tell you about a moment in Scripture that most people skip. It's in the book of Ruth. There's a man named Elimelech, and there's a famine in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, by the way, means house of bread, and there's no bread in the house of bread. That's ironic. That's painful. And Elimelech makes a decision. He takes his wife Naomi and his 2 sons and moves to Moab. Moab is enemy territory. Moab is the place you go when you've given up on God's provision. And Elimelech dies there, and then his sons die there. And Naomi is left in a foreign land with no husband, no sons, no income, no protection, no future. She has nothing. She even tries to change her name from Naomi, which means pleasant, to Mara, which means bitter. She says, the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. That's a woman who feels worthless. That's a woman who feels abandoned. That's a woman who feels like her purpose died with her family. And here's what God does with her emptiness. He builds a lineage through her daughter-in-law Ruth that leads to King David, and from David, eventually, to Jesus. The woman who called herself bitter and empty became part of the bloodline of the Messiah. She had no idea. She was walking through famine and death and grief and bitterness, and the whole time God was weaving her into the greatest story ever told. She couldn't see it. She couldn't feel it. She couldn't imagine it. But it was happening. What if the same thing is happening to you? What if your story right now, the one that feels like loss and failure and emptiness, is actually a crucial chapter in a story so much bigger than your career? Let me speak to the men for a moment, because men carry a particular weight when they lose work. From the time we're boys, we're told that our job is to provide. It's drilled into us. A man takes care of his family. A man pays the bills. A man carries the weight. And when you can't do that, when the paycheck stops and the savings drain and you're watching your wife pick up extra shifts or your kids wear last year's shoes because you can't afford new ones, something in you dies. You feel like less of a man. You feel like a failure, not just as a worker, but as a husband, as a father, as a human being. And that shame runs deep. It's primal. It's not rational. You can't think your way out of it. Let me tell you something. Your masculinity is not defined by your income. It never was. Your role as a husband is not reducible to your paycheck. Your value as a father is not measured in what you can buy your kids. The provider role is real and it matters. But provision is more than money. You can provide presence when you're unemployed. You can provide emotional safety. You can provide wisdom. You can provide prayer. You can provide the example of a man who doesn't crumble when life gets hard. You think your kids need your money more than they need to see their father trust God in the storm. You think your wife needs your paycheck more than she needs to see her husband lead spiritually when everything is falling apart. The money will come back. The example you set right now will last for generations. This is your moment to show them what a man of God looks like when the chips are down. Not a man who never struggles, a man who struggles and still believes. And to the women, I see you too. Maybe you're the one who lost the job. Or maybe you're the wife watching your husband go through it and you feel helpless. Or maybe you're a single mom and losing your job feels like the floor just dropped out of your entire world because there's no backup. There's no second income. There's only you. And the weight of that is crushing. Let me remind you of something. The Proverbs 31 woman, the one everyone talks about like she's some unattainable ideal, she was a businesswoman. She traded, she invested, she made things and sold them. She was industrious and capable. But here's what the text actually says about her. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come, not because her business never failed, not because her investments always paid off, not because her income was guaranteed, but because her worth was in something deeper than her output. She could laugh at the future not because she controlled it, but because she trusted the God who did. You can be that woman right now, unemployed, uncertain, scared, and still clothed in strength and dignity, still able to face tomorrow, not because you're not afraid, but because you're going to trust God in the fear. Now let me talk about something uncomfortable: anger. You might be angry at the company, at the boss, at the coworker who kept their job while you didn't, at the system, at yourself, at God. Especially at God, because you did everything right. You prayed, you tithed, you served, you were faithful. And this is what you get: a closed door, an empty inbox, a strained marriage, a faith that feels like it's hanging by a thread. You're allowed to be angry. God can handle your anger. Read the Psalms. Half of them are complaints. David yelling at God, "Where are you? Why have you forsaken me? How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" That's scripture. That's in the Bible. God didn't edit out the angry parts. He included them because he wants the real you, not the polite you. The you that's furious and confused and barely holding on. Bring that to him. He's not afraid of your anger. He's not intimidated by your questions. He's not going to smite you for being honest. The only thing that will drive a wedge between you and God is pretending. Pretending you're fine when you're not. Pretending you trust him when you're actually furious. Pretending your faith is strong when it's barely breathing. Don't pretend. Bring the mess. Bring the anger. Bring the questions. He can take it. And somewhere in the process of being completely honest with God, the anger starts to transform. Not because you got answers, but because you got presence. And presence is often better than answers anyway. Let's go back to Joseph for a moment, because there's a detail in his story that I didn't mention yet, and it's crucial. When Joseph finally stands before his brothers, the same brothers who threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery, he says something remarkable. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. He's not saying what you did was good. He's not saying the pit was good. He's not saying slavery was good. He's not saying 13 years of suffering was good. He's saying God took the thing that was meant to destroy him and used it to save an entire nation. That's what God does. He doesn't cause the evil, but he redeems it. He doesn't author the tragedy, but he writes a comeback into the story. The company that let you go, they had their reasons. Maybe they were bad reasons. Maybe they were unfair reasons. Maybe they were purely financial and had nothing to do with you. Whatever their intentions were, God has his own intentions, and his intentions are good. They always are. Even when you can't see it, even when it doesn't feel like it, even when every circumstance is screaming the opposite. God's intentions toward you are good, and he is skilled at turning harm into purpose. It's kind of his specialty. Let me talk about the practical side of hope, because hope without action is just wishing, and you're not a wisher. You're a doer who's temporarily sidelined. So, what does active hope look like? It looks like this. You make a list of every skill you have, not just job skills, every skill. You're good at listening, write it down. You're good at organizing, write it down. You're good at making people feel seen, write it down. You're good at fixing things, write it down. You're good at explaining complex ideas simply, write it down. You have more to offer than your resume suggests. Your resume is a thin slice of who you actually are, and right now you have the time to explore the rest of the pie. Active hope also looks like this. You reach out to 3 people this week, not to ask for a job, to ask about their story. How did they get where they are? What do they love about their work? What would they do differently? People love talking about themselves, and in those conversations you learn. You learn about industries you never considered. You learn about paths you didn't know existed. You learn that almost nobody's career is a straight line. Everyone has pivots and failures and closed doors and unexpected openings. Everyone. The people you envy right now have their own stories of rejection and waiting and wondering. They just don't lead with that part. Active hope looks like curiosity instead of desperation, and curiosity is magnetic. People want to help curious people. People run from desperate people. So be curious, even now, especially now. Let me speak to the person who's been out of work for a while, not weeks, months, maybe longer. And every day that passes, the hope gets a little thinner. The prayers feel a little hollower. The faith feels a little more like going through the motions. You've had interviews that went nowhere. You've had promising leads that evaporated. You've had moments where you thought, this is it, this is the breakthrough, only to be disappointed again. And now you're not even sure you believe anymore. Not in yourself, not in your future, maybe not even in God. I want to be careful here, because I know you're fragile, and the last thing you need is another person telling you to just keep believing, so I won't say that. Instead, I'll tell you what God did for a man named Abraham. God promised Abraham a son, and Abraham believed, but then nothing happened. For a year, for 5 years, for 10 years, for 25 years. 25 years between the promise and the fulfillment. And in that quarter century, Abraham had every reason to give up. His body was aging. His wife was past childbearing age. The promise was physically impossible, and yet, Romans 4 says Abraham did not waver in his faith. Now that sounds superhuman, and maybe it was, but I think it was actually just stubborn. I think Abraham just refused to let go, not because he never had doubts, but because every time doubt showed up, he made the choice to believe again. That's all faith is, a series of choices. You don't need faith for the whole journey. You just need faith for today, and then tomorrow you'll need faith for tomorrow. You're not failing because you're struggling to believe for the next 6 months. Just believe for today. That's enough. Now I want to bring this home, because we've covered a lot of ground. The shame, the fear, the identity crisis, the anger, the waiting, the people who don't understand, the practical steps, the biblical stories. But what does it all add up to? What's the single thread running through all of this? Here it is. You are not what you produce. You are who God says you are, and God says you are beloved. God says you are valuable. God says you have a purpose. God says you have a future. God says He is working all things together for your good. God says He will never leave you or forsake you. God says He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. God says you are more than a conqueror. God says nothing can separate you from His love. Not unemployment, not rejection, not failure, not shame, not fear, not doubt. Nothing. Those aren't my words. Those are His. And He doesn't lie. He doesn't exaggerate. He doesn't make promises He can't keep. If He said it, it's true. Full stop. Period. End of discussion. And here's the thing about truth. It doesn't depend on your feelings to be true. The sun is still shining behind the clouds even when you can't see it. Your worth is still intact even when you can't feel it. Your purpose is still in place even when you can't discern it. Your God is still on the throne even when He seems absent. The truth is the truth regardless of your emotional response to it. And your job right now, your actual job, is to align your beliefs with the truth, not to align the truth with your feelings. The feelings will follow, they always do, but they follow. They don't lead. You lead with faith. You lead with truth. And eventually, maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually the feelings catch up. One more story and then I'll land this plane. There's a man in the New Testament named Paul. You know Paul. He wrote half the New Testament. But before he was Paul the Apostle, he was Saul the Pharisee, and he was on top of the world, educated, respected, powerful, on his way up. And then he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, and everything changed. He lost his status, he lost his reputation, he lost his career trajectory. He went from persecuting Christians to becoming one, from the top of the religious establishment to being hunted by it. If anyone understood career derailment, it was Paul, and yet here's what he wrote. Whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage, that I may gain Christ. Did you catch that? He calls his entire former career garbage, not because it was worthless in itself, but because compared to knowing Christ, it was nothing. The thing he lost, he didn't miss, because he found something better. And that's my prayer for you. Not just that you get another job, but that in the space between the old job and the new one, you find something better. Not a better job, a better foundation, a better identity, a better security, a better worth, one that can't be laid off, one that can't be downsized, one that can't be taken from you, because your worth was never in that job. It was always, only, ever in Him. So here's what you do now. You wake up tomorrow and you take the next step, not the next 10 steps, the next one. You send the application, you make the call, you work on the skill, you write the idea down, you have the conversation, you take the walk, you say the prayer. Even if it's just, God, I don't feel you, but I'm choosing to trust you today. That's enough. That's faith. That's the mustard seed. And mustard seeds move mountains, not because they're big, because they're planted. And the God who grows them is bigger than any mountain you're facing. You're going to look back on this season one day, maybe not soon, but one day, and you're going to see threads you can't see right now. You're going to see connections that are invisible to you in this moment. You're going to see that the job you lost was the best thing that could have happened to you, not because it was good, but because God is good, and He uses everything, even the layoffs, even the rejections, even the closed doors, even the silent seasons, everything. So stop believing the lie that you're worthless. It's a lie. The enemy wants you to believe it because it keeps you paralyzed. God wants you to reject it because He wants you moving toward Him, moving toward your purpose, moving toward the next chapter, moving toward the version of yourself that this season is producing. You lost a job, you didn't lose your worth, you didn't lose your purpose, you didn't lose your future, you didn't lose your God. The job is gone, you're still here, and that means the story isn't over. Not even close. So get up, take the next step, trust the process, and watch what God does with a person who refuses to believe the lie. Because the truth is, you are not worthless. You were never worthless. You will never be worthless. You are loved. You are chosen. You are purposed. You are seen. You are held. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are not finished. The God of Joseph is your God. The God of Moses is your God. The God of David is your God. The God of Peter is your God. The God of Paul is your God. The God who restores is your God. The God who redeems is your God. The God who makes all things new is your God. And He's writing a story with your life that is bigger and better and more beautiful than anything you could write on your own. Even now, even in this, even here, He's writing. And He's not done. I want to leave you with something. Not a sermon, not a lesson, not even advice really, just something to carry with you when you walk out of this room, when you put the phone down, when the silence comes back and the feelings start lying again. Here it is. You are not what happened to you. You are what God is still doing in you. The job that let you go doesn't get to name you. The boss who didn't see your value doesn't get to define you. The company that moved on without you doesn't get to write the rest of your story. The rejection letters don't get to tell you who you are. The empty inbox doesn't get to measure your worth. The silence doesn't get to have the final word. God does. And God says you are still in this. You are still called. You are still gifted. You are still necessary. There are people you haven't met yet who need what you carry. There are problems you haven't solved yet that are waiting for your specific mind. There are doors you haven't knocked on that are about to open, and there is a version of you on the other side of this season who will look back at this moment not with pain but with gratitude, because this is where it all turned. This is where the old identity died and the real one started to breathe. This is where you stopped performing for your worth and started receiving it. This is where faith stopped being a concept and became the thing that got you out of bed in the morning. The comeback is already in motion. You can't see it yet. You can't feel it yet, but it's happening. Under the surface, in the dark, in the silence, the roots are growing. The foundation is setting. The preparation is happening. And one day soon, the breakthrough will come. Not because you earned it, not because you were perfect in the waiting, but because God is faithful, and He finishes what He starts. And He started something in you a long time ago that this layoff did not cancel. So hold on, not with a clenched fist, with an open hand, surrendered, trusting, believing that the God who brought Joseph from the pit to the palace, the God who led Moses from the wilderness to the sea, the God who took David from the fields to the throne, the God who restored Job double for his trouble, the God who turned Peter's denial into Pentecost, that same God is working in your life right now, in the waiting, in the silence, in the uncertainty, in the fear. Right now, He is working, and He's not finished with you yet.